Well, I'm Jessica Stevenson. We've been coming to this church now for a couple years. And I was actually having a lot of hot flashes, night sweats, kind of like menopause symptoms. And it just turned out that my body wasn't producing any hormones. So when I was 17, I had a bunch of tests run. And when we were on our way to the doctor's office to get the results, I remember driving there and just praying to God that that He didn't say that I couldn't have kids. I mean, I was prepared for anything else. I was actually even praying that it was cancer instead. I mean, I felt I could fight cancer, but tell me I can't have kids, and I couldn't handle it. But of course, we got there and we got the news that I didn't want. It's called premature ovarian failure, and most people are diagnosed like in their 30s. So I was actually one of the youngest that had been diagnosed with it. And they told us that I probably had maybe a 3% chance of ever having biological children. And I remember sitting there, I didn't cry, and kind of took it all in. And I was angry, but I kind of felt at peace with it because we finally knew what was going on. And then that night I prayed about it, and I just prayed that I could have understanding. There had to have been a reason why this was happening to someone who wanted kids their entire life. And I remember waking up the next morning and saying, well, I'm going to adopt. So I never really dated. I felt like it wasn't fair to any guy to be with them, to have them, love me and then me not be able to give them a child. So I never really dated. But then I met Will, and he kind of changed everything. Because there for a while I felt kind of broken. I felt like I wasn't worth, being with anybody who could love someone who, couldn't give them children, and it wouldn't be fair to them. But I think we were together maybe a couple weeks, and I finally told him, I just want to let you know, I can't have children. And he was 19 at the time, and I think he looked at me and I think he said something along the lines, well, that's like, I don't really want kids. I was like, well, all right, this kind of works out. But, we were together for a few years, and we started talking about the future and wanting to have kids, and he never once made me feel broken. He never once made me feel like there was something wrong with me. He never once made me feel like he was missing out on not having a child of his own. He was always very supportive and loving, and I always felt sure that I was going to be a mom when I was with him. I never doubted that he would make that happen for me. We were in our relationship for a couple years when we started seriously talking about, what we would do to have a family. And, I told him, I just felt like I was always called to adopt. And, I said we could look at IVF and we could look at doing all of that, but we both kind of talked about it and felt that, if there are children already out there who need a home, we want to be that home. I think it was after we got married. It was probably just right after the honeymoon. I was like, all right, well, let's start looking at adoption agencies. Like, I'll look up some. Let's, let's get this rolling. I've waited 7 years.
Yep.
And you kind of were like, well, let's just slow down. Let's get financial stability and everything, but I was ready to go. But, I trusted him was the big thing. I knew that he was going to make me a mom, and I knew it was going to happen. And so I trusted him fully that, that when the time was right, the time was going to be right. And he was right.
And I remember when we were going through marriage counseling with Steve, he asked, so how are you guys going to have kids? And I said, I'll do whatever she wants. We'll find a way. It's just a matter of figuring it out. So I remember that, though.
Yeah, and then I think it was 2 years into our marriage, maybe. I talked him into finally going to an adoption agency, and we sat down with them and listened to their whole spiel about everything, and the class ended, and I was like, all right, I'm going to turn the paperwork in. And he was
Said
like,
no.
no, let's think about this. And then he told me, let me do some research, let me look at some things, and then, we'll decide what we want to do. Yeah, he looked into the foster care, and he, brought it to me and said, what do you think about doing foster to adopt? And I remember thinking, yeah, I mean, that sounds great, but I don't know if my heart could handle a child going back after loving them for so long. Like how, especially somebody like me who wants to be a mom so bad. I know foster care is meant to, have children go back to their parents and or grandparents, but I just don't know if I'm capable of doing that. And then we were kind of towards the end of our paperwork with the foster system. And, and I just found myself really praying to God, like, is this the right path? I trust my husband fully, but, is this the plan you have for us? And sure enough, he gave us a sign. We just had Chinese. We were filling out the rest of our paperwork, finishing it up. And I looked at him and I said, well, hold on, let's open up our fortune cookies. I want to see what they say. And it's funny because they both were like spot on. I opened mine up first, and mine was, a happy event will take place shortly in your home. And I was just like, oh my gosh, can you believe that says that? I said, what does yours say? And so he opened his up, and then yours said,
what does it say?
Yours said, go above and beyond your duty, you will benefit from it. And so I kept those fortune cookies, and I put them in a frame, and I put them in our nursery so that I could always look at it. And when things got hard or things were difficult, that I could always look at it and know this is where we're meant to be. This is, the path we're supposed to be taking. You were right.
Yeah, one thing that I think back on is, and I forget who was saying this, if it was Pastor Steve or if it was someone else, but it was, I forget who was saying it, but they said, figure out who you're like that's in the Bible. Like, figure out who your Bible character is. And I remember, I think we even talked about it. I don't know that I ever told you this in like full depth, but I did a bunch of research and started looking online, and ultimately mine was Moses. And like, I'm not comparing myself to Moses at all, but ultimately that's who it came up as. And through this journey, I feel like it's been very similar. There have been times when I've questioned God about this and said, is this the right thing to do? Are we on the right path? Are you sure it's us? Are you sure we're supposed to do this? And ultimately, it's led us to where we are today. So I constantly think back to that, though.
We got our foster license in October of 2017. Literally, I hung up the phone, and not even 30 minutes later, I got a call. They had a 5-year-old that needed a home. And we thought about it, and there were just some circumstances that we couldn't. And then it was about a month later, we got another call for a sibling group of 3, and we were like, oh, 3 kids. I don't know if we could do 3 kids. And unfortunately, we had to say no again. But then I remember it was December 13th. I was at work, and I get a call. And it's the social worker, and she's like, we have a newborn baby girl, and she needs a home. And I was like, that is it. I was like, there was no doubt in my mind. I was like, this is the call we have been waiting for years. This is it. And I hung up the phone, and I called him right away, and I was like, they need an answer, and we're saying yes. Like, I need to call them back now. Like, you just need to accept we're saying yes. And he was like, well, yeah, I mean, he says, this sounds pretty great, a newborn. We wanted a newborn and a baby girl. So, yeah, so we hung up the phone. We told him yes. And, then we got rights to be able to visit her in the hospital. And I remember that day driving up in December. I think it was like December 15th we went up. And I remember, we got there. We, scrubbed because she was in the NICU, and washed up and put the gown on. And I remember going in and scanning the nursery and wondering which baby's mine. Like,
I remember on the way up to the hospital, I told Jess, I was like, don't get too attached. You cannot walk in and get attached right away because we don't know what's going to happen. this could be a temporary week-long thing or a month or a year or who knows. And within like 30 seconds of seeing her, I was the one that
yeah. He's holding her and he looks over at me and he's like, I thought it was going to be you, but it's...
Yeah, I knew it was me. As soon as I saw her, I knew I was going to be the problem.
Yep, you got attached pretty quick.
Really quick.
But, you know, we spent the next couple weeks with her in the NICU. You know, when, you know, she was real tiny. She was only 5 pounds, 7 ounces?
4 pounds, 7
4 pounds, 7 ounces, yeah. She was tiny. She was a tiny little thing. So she had to spend a couple weeks in the NICU. And, you know, I remember just, I mean, you fell in love immediately. I mean, it was instant.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we were taking her home, the social worker, she comes up and she says, I don't know if I want to tell you this, but the parents actually want to sign over their rights. They want her to be adopted. And I remember my heart just dropped. Like, she said, this has never happened in the foster care. She's like, all the years I've been working, I've never seen parents willingly wanting to sign over their rights right away. She goes, you know, this is just amazing. And I was just thinking, no, this is God. Like, this, he put me here in this plan. He knew I wanted a baby girl, and he's delivered. Like, they want to sign over their rights. They want her to be adopted, and we want to adopt her. Like, it was just so perfect. And I remember all the stress and worry I had of, you know, doing visitations with the parents and her possibly going back. It was gone. And I immediately saw her as like ours completely. And then it was about the end of January. I was at home, he was out of town, and he called me. And he told me that the social worker called him and told him that they had changed their mind, that they wanted her, and that someone would get a hold of us shortly to start visitations. And I was crushed.
Yeah, that was tough. That was really hard.
Oh yeah, that was the longest 6 weeks of my life. I was so angry at God. Every day I would cry. Every day I would pretty much scream and yell at God. Basically saying, how could you do this? How could you put me through this at 17? Make me believe that I was meant to adopt. Make me believe this was your plan. How cruel could you be to then deliver us a baby whose parents want to sign over the rights and let her be adopted? How dare you let me feel like she was mine if you were just going to take her away? And I was so angry. I've never been that angry in my life. And it was super hard. And I just remember thinking, why? What's the purpose? What's the point of doing this? The first visit, I remember getting her ready, and putting her in the cutest little outfit I could find, the cutest little headband. Will and I decided to write him a really nice letter, you know, telling him, you know, how much she's grown, how well she's doing, how much we love her, you know, how hard this must be for them, you know. And I remember the parents came out, and it was the first time I met them. And, you know, I shook both their hands, and they both thanked me for the letter and for taking care of their daughter, and they were very nice. And it was such a weird feeling, because as much as I loved Lexi and I wanted her to be ours, I never wanted to wish harm or bad on her parents. Her birth parents loved her. They weren't horrible people. They just did horrible things. And it was such a weird mix of emotions, because I wanted them to do well. They had 2 other girls. I wanted them to succeed and, you know, get off drugs and do well. But at the same time, I allowed myself to feel like she was ours. And
well, that's a part of the challenge with the entire process, is you get attached to a child and you want that child to be your child forever. And at the same time, when the parents start becoming more involved, you're very suspicious of why. They weren't involved at the beginning. They
No, they never
They didn't-
once visited her the whole time she was in the NICU, and they were allowed to be there every day.
were allowed to be there every day. They didn't come. But they also, like, you think about what happened before she was born. She was born addicted to methadone. So you think you weren't there for when you were pregnant. Why do you want to be there now? And it's this feeling of you're angry with the parents and you're angry at the situation, but you think about it from your perspective too, of how bad we wanted to be Lexi's mom and dad. They're going through the exact same thing on their side too. They want to be Lexi's mom and dad too, through the entire process. And it, emotions get crazier around court.
I've never experienced emotions like I did. It was actually March 1st of 2018 that was our last visit. They visited with her, and the next week rolls around, and I get a call. Parents have decided they don't want to visit. They want her to be adopted, that they really like you guys. And I think, what they needed was to see that she was okay, to see that she was with people who loved her. And part of me actually, admired the parents, that they were able to see that they couldn't give her the life that they deserved, that she, they wanted better for her. And, I think that took a really strong person to say, I can't raise my daughter. I want you to. And then I felt silly for being so angry at God, why was I so angry? But, the part of me was still going, but what was that for? Why did you do, what was the whole point of that? I just couldn't understand it, but I was no longer angry. I told him sorry. But, we then went on our first little family vacation to Florida, and that was fun. It was stormed the whole time. The whole week we were there. But we had managed to get one day out on the beach. It was cloudy, but we went out there, and we get a call from our social worker, and she's like, I'm calling, see if you guys wanted to take 2 girls. We have a placement for you. And we were like, no. And then she's like, well, it's actually Lexi's 2 older sisters, Addie and Anna. And then we were like, oh, well, yeah, let us, kind of think about it, and, we'll get back to you. And after we got the call, when we decided, yes, we're going to do this, Will calls his brother to tell his brother, hey, we're going to, take on Lexi's 2 older sisters. And before he could even tell him, he gets on the phone, and his brother Ben was like, yeah, I did your landscaping while you guys are out of town. He's like, I bought some sunflowers because I know they're Jess's favorite. He's like, I planted one for her, one for you, one for Lexi, but I got 2 more. Who do you want me to plant them for? And I was like, there's the sign. We're supposed to, this is the plan. We're supposed to have all 3 girls. It's just what meant to be. I was getting excited each day that went by, Lexi, your sisters are coming to live with us, and, it was such a good feeling. And then I remember when she pulled up with them, and that vision will never
rips your heart out.
Leave my mind.
I know exactly what you're talking about. They're walking down the sidewalk, and they're walking kind of hunched over behind the
carrying
social
their little
work.
book bags.
Each carrying a book bag full of the stuff that they had. And
their blankets from home. They both had a blanket and a couple clothes, and
they were scared and terrified.
Yeah, they just stood in the doorway for a while, just kind of, that's a lot to ask kids to, to then now live in a home where they didn't know anybody. But the one thing the girls had was they had Lexi, and they were so excited to meet her. We have a picture of when the first day they all met, and all 3 together, and they already have their arms on her and smiling. They just loved her. And I remember it didn't take long of just watching the 3 interact that I knew that they were meant to be together. They used to call us
him and her.
No, girl and him.
Oh yeah.
That was our name for a couple weeks.
Yeah.
girl, and him. And I don't know why, but it didn't take long. They started calling him dad right away. You know, reaching out. And I think, where were we? Were we downstairs, I think, the first time they called you dad?
Yeah.
And I just remember you kind of looked at me and I kind of looked at you, and we didn't want to, like, you know, like, say anything, because we were like,
whoa,
did you heard that too, right? They said dad.
I said, what'd you say? And I think it was Addie, and she said, daddy?
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Yeah, it took them a lot longer to call me mom, but that's okay. They do know.
it still cracks me up. Sometimes I kind of wish they'd get back to him and girl, because it was so funny. They'd walk through, where him at? Where's that girl?
Yeah. Where'd that girl go? It was about, I think, a month or two in, that a light bulb, I was like, that's why you put me through those 6 weeks of hell, was because you had a bigger plan than what I could have imagined. If Lexi's parents never came in when they did, we might have been so far along in the adoption process that we might not have been able to, A, take Addie and Anna, B, maybe they wouldn't have called us, because, you know, sometimes when you're in the process of adopting a child, foster care won't let you take on new placements. I mean, there were so many different possibilities that might have happened, but it all clicked. Like, he had to intervene the way he did to slow down the process, to then allow us to then take on all 3 girls. And it's just kind of what I want people to take from a lot of this is, you might think you know what plan God has for you. I thought I knew at 17. God's plan was, I was going to adopt a baby girl, and I was going to live happily ever after. And that's what I saw. But I only saw little bullet points of his plan. I didn't fully see what his plan was. And his plan was 10 times bigger and 10 times more amazing than the plan that I thought that I knew. And when things seem difficult, or they're not going the way you thought, I just wish somebody would have told me, be patient, have faith, and, you know, in the end, it's going to be a bigger plan than what you imagined. And it would have saved me a lot of tears, a lot of heartache, a lot of pain, if I would have just been patient and had faith.